Chest up, shoulders back. This is revival fitness. This has been happening for a number of years now as the hypertrophy culture has completely taken over the lifting scene, but power building is under attack. All of these gripes against it ultimately aren't legitimate. It is not like you can't get really big and build all these giant muscles and also not get very strong at the same time. In fact, that used to be normal. It seems to me that only in the past decade or so, people say things like, well, I don't care how much I can bench, or deadlift, or squat, or whatever exercise you're referring to. I just want to look like I can. Maybe I'm the first one to tell you this, but for the vast majority of you, you're going to have to actually bench that much to look like you can bench that much. And just because you max out on your bench, even on a pretty regular basis, your muscles are not going to start melting away, and you're not going to sacrifice muscle gain just because you're doing so. So before we dive into everything, let's just discuss the term power building itself, because this term really has no true meaning, right? It is an iteration of multiple fitness activities. It originally spawned as a combination of powerlifting and bodybuilding, even though the vast majority of people who use this term are not powerlifters nor bodybuilders. I will die on this hill, guys. I'm going to say this till I'm blue in the face, especially when it pisses some of you guys off, because you deserve to be mad by it. You're not a bodybuilder just because you build muscle. If you have never and never planned to step on a stage, until you do, you're not a bodybuilder. And likewise, even if you max out on the squat, bench, and deadlift routinely, until you put on the singlet and go to a meet, you're not a powerlifter. You can get mad and call that gatekeeping. There's no gatekeeping. These things are open entry. You pay the fee, you go to the competition of your choosing. There's no gatekeeping here. It's simply defining what these things are, because they are organized competitive events. You taking mirror selfies in your bathroom and going to the commercial gym or lifting in your garage, you don't qualify, buddy, I'm sorry. But this is where things get tricky, because when it comes to bodybuilding, or the building part of power building, that is very vague because you can build muscle doing pretty much any exercises that you really want to. The power part, everybody likes to conflate so-called strength, right? You see these guys all the time say, I train for hypertrophy, not strength. There is this very weird assumption that talking about strength training automatically means powerlifting. Strength does not mean that. I don't know where you guys came up with this idea. I don't know if it's because throughout the years a lot of people that talk about strength do compete in powerlifting. Maybe that's why they get so attached to each other. But discussing strength and talking about getting stronger can refer to any exercise, any rep range. It is not exclusive to only the power lifts. The term power building really came to fruition, I want to say 5 or so years ago. I remember seeing it a lot whenever I was newer into the gym scene and consuming this type of content. But essentially what would be promoted is focusing on the bench and the squat and the deadlift, maybe the overhead press, maybe some other variations too. What it really boils down to, and if you have used or seen my programs, I do a template that's relatively similar to this. I don't call for maxing out. I don't think it's necessary to do that unless you just want to. But you're going to focus on the bench, the squat, and the deadlift, kind of the core barbell lifts, typically for lower reps and less volume, and then you're going to do the hypertrophy work. That is what power building training, broad scope, that's what it really comes down to, and that is ultimately how a lot of powerlifters train. This is another huge misconception. Guys on the internet, especially the hypertrophycels, they believe that powerlifters are just walking into the gym, they do a bunch of 1-rep maxes on the bench, squat, and deadlift, and they leave. You guys have evidently never spent time in powerlifting gyms. You probably don't even know any powerlifters yourselves. Like, the amount of sheer Reddit conjecture about this topic is crazy. We're gonna talk more about that conjecture coming up soon. But the idea that powerlifters only do those 3 lifts and they leave, it doesn't even add up, okay? Go watch any powerlifter train. Go even look at some of these people's Instagram pages. You're going to see them doing what is called accessory work. What does that mean? It really boils down to hypertrophy training. Because after they do their main lifts, and even so, guys, keep in mind, even if you're doing only 2 hard sets of deadlift, that is still going to put muscle on you. Now you can argue, okay, is it as effective as XYZ other exercise? That's fine. But you're still going to grow muscle doing squats, deadlifts, bench presses, all the classic kind of stuff. And this is what a lot of people don't understand either, man, because again, you guys are so enamored with the aesthetic culture, everybody being lean all the time and being shirtless. You think these dudes on the internet, all the aesthetic bras, you think they actually are as big in person as they appear online. So say you come across two Instagram accounts. The first is a popular aesthetics bra, and he's got the deep fried picture taken with a 4K camera, all edited up. It's been ran through Lightroom and Photoshop. Another filter has been put on it. It's from the perfect angle. They took it 100 times. He's got his abs. He looks very good. So you see him and you think, oh, that guy looks really big, man. He's got a lot of muscles because he's lean, right? Then you see a powerlifter that is smoking him on lifts of pretty much every category you could think of, but the powerlifter is recording themselves from 10 feet away so they can fit all of the bar and the plates into the video. They are without question going to be higher body fat in the vast majority of cases, and they're not posturing for the camera. There's no perfect angles and all this other stuff. They just set their thing up and they go. Who do you think is going to look bigger upon first sight? But then think of what I just said. The powerlifter is torching the aesthetic bra on all these exercises. So even if he does not appear bigger right off of the first glance, if you put these two together, the powerlifter, not only would he be thicker, he'd be wider. There's obviously going to be some height differences depending on who you're talking about. But the fact that you guys believe that powerlifters are somehow lacking in all this muscle mass because they do power building or they don't only train for hypertrophy, it shows how little you actually know. I go to gyms with serious powerlifters in them, and they are not small people, the men or the women. These guys have gigantic turkey legs, they have big hamstrings, they have big backs, big forearms. Their chests, once again, are not going to be as defined typically because of the higher body fat, but anybody who's benching well over 300 pounds does not have a small chest. It simply does not work that way. And this might be the best part because the hypertrophycels are like, oh, well, he might be really strong, but I still look better, I'll tell you what, bro, if these powerlifters cut down, and when they do, and there are numerous examples of this, both men and women, who start out as powerlifters, or maybe they do powerlifting in their off season, then they do bodybuilding as they get leaner, they kind of rotate back and forth between them. These powerlifters, man, once they finally cut down, I don't care if you're talking natural or enhanced, in a lot of the cases, you could even say the vast majority of cases, they have more overall muscle mass than the guys obsessed with only hypertrophy. A common phrase in bodybuilding is that shows are won from the back. If you had to guess, as a general rule, who has more developed posterior chains? All of it. Lats, traps, low back, glutes, hamstrings. Is it going to be the aesthetic hypertrophy guys who say, oh, well, squats are not optimal and deadlifts are just not a good hypertrophy exercise? Bent over rows and too much low back involvement, not stable enough? Or are the people who squat and deadlift in some capacity, if not doing other heavy back and leg movements on a weekly basis? But I don't compete in bodybuilding, so I don't care about what you just said. Okay, point taken, that's fine. But what if I told you that people who compete in bodybuilding, many of whom have IFBB pro cards, some of them on the Olympia level in the top 5 in their classes, what if I told you that they still do power lifts? And not only that, that they do them for low reps. Because whether you compete in bodybuilding or not, and a lot of you guys still claim you're bodybuilders even though you don't, the ultimate goal of the recreational lifter who optimizes hypertrophy or the bodybuilder both want the most amount of muscle possible. So you would think, oh, well, there's no way that these bodybuilders would be doing the power lifts because they're not optimal for hypertrophy. Check the screen right now. I'm going to overlay a handful of people. I'm actually going to include some women too, because I know that's going to really piss some of you guys off. You can see their accounts, you can check their pages if you don't believe me. They all do the power lifts, if not outright maxing out in some capacity. And once again, I'm sure people are going to misconstrue what I'm saying. I think it's on purpose at this point because this is pretty clear, I think. They're going to say, oh, Revival says you should be maxing out and doing the power lifts. You have to do them to get really big. I never said that, guys. All I'm saying is, so many people now say that doing these lifts is detrimental to hypertrophy and you're going to lose gains and suffer and all this stuff it's going to be, oh, too fatiguing, you can't do your other volume properly. That's not the case. These are just a few examples. I can find many, many more. This video could go on for hours and hours of just these examples. That is evidently not the case. If that was the case, all these people who are doing the power lifts and maxing out, again, these are IFBB pros, high-ranking, Olympia caliber, a lot of them, they would not be where they were if what you guys claim is actually true. That the power lifts and strength training and all this other stuff are so detrimental to building size. And now, of course, the response is going to be this. Oh, well, everybody you just showed is on a bunch of steroids, bro. That doesn't count. We're talking about natural lifters. Natural lifters, they need... Once again, you can't even prove all these people that claim natural are natural. There's no way to do it. You guys just believe everybody at face value. We used to know this a number of years ago. Before the hypertrophy cells overtook every aspect of lifting content, we used to know this. If you want to get big as a natural, you also need to get strong. The only people this really is an exception for are the people that are juicing. And as I just showed you, plenty of people who are juicing, even on heavy amounts, they still are very strong. The only scenario you're going to find somebody with these big bulging muscles and they're so jacked, but then they're not nearly as strong on main exercises as you would think they are. Yeah, we used to have a term for that. It's called a juice head. That is only achievable through not just a little bit, that is a lot of anabolic use. And in some cases too, those people might actually be pinning like oil, I think it's called PMMA injections, if not outright synthol, into their muscles to make them look much bigger. But that is the only conceivable scenario. These guys used to be universally laughed at by all serious gym goers. And now they're celebrated. Like, that's how much the tide has turned. And of course, said guys, fanboys, and associates, they're going to defend him, and they're going to give him the self-assurance, like, oh, you're not that weak, bro, it's okay, well, he's just built different, he's unique, he trains differently. Once again, these guys, if they had no associations or ties with the dude, they would be mocking him. They would say, dang, that guy's really weak for his size, that's kind of embarrassing. But because they want to stay in his good graces, it's all smiles and claps and reassurance. But those are two very common arguments you still hear when it comes to this topic, the differentiation, allegedly, of size and strength. They'll say, oh, well, this guy's really big, but he's not that strong. Or, oh, well, this guy's really small, but he's super strong. The level to which a lot of you don't understand basic statistics is kind of scary. So I get variations of this comment all the time. There's going to be many of them down below in this video. Guys will say, oh, well, we know there's a lot of power lifters with underwhelming physiques, not that much muscle mass. They lift a ton of weight. Here is how you can nuke this argument in seconds. It completely makes it go belly up. Every time you see a comment like this, here's how to respond. Name 5. As I mentioned earlier, I don't want to hear this Reddit conjecture. I want actual names and or accounts. I want to see these mythical people that have barely any muscle mass, terrible physiques, but they're so insanely strong. Here's how it's gonna go. They'll say, the skinny Asian guy that benches 400, that happened like 8 years ago at this point. That's all they got. Sure, you can look it up and you might be able to find a few more examples. But even so, if you can name 5, congratulations, you named 5 lifters. Even if you could compile a list of dozens of powerlifters who are much stronger than they look, and that's also still relative ultimately, because of the factors we talked about earlier, that is still a fraction, a tiny fraction, of the overall populace of those lifters. And the fact alone that we say this guy is way stronger than he looks and it's a big deal, that proves the point. Because we innately know that the bigger people are, in almost every single case, always going to lift more weight. And even so, if these small people with the underwhelming physiques built more muscle, guess what? For their own genetics and potential, they would still get stronger. And when it comes to this guy's really jacked, but he's not as strong as he looks, a lot of these guys online are not as big as you think. A lot of the hypertrophy guys at this point are editing their pictures, not just with filters and Lightroom and that type of thing, they're genuinely photoshopping their pictures to give themselves bigger muscles. Okay? They're pulling out the edges so their arms and shoulders pop out more, they draw their waist in. Some people make this too obvious, others are pretty darn good at it. A common example are women whenever they post their booty pictures, and they make their waist really, really small and their butt curves out kind of egregiously wide. It's ultimately the same thing. But once again, you see this stuff at a quick glance, you don't really analyze the picture. You're not going to notice this. You're just going to be like, oh my god, that guy's so jacked. That's amazing. Like. And on top of that too, do not discount the lengths that these guys will go to take picture after picture after picture after video after video after video after picture of themselves. So what a lot of these guys do is, they are addicted to junk volume as it is. So they go do their junk volume pump for their arms. I watched this happen, guys, in my gym about a month ago. There was some influencer guy in there. The dude is completely yoked. He's got huge muscles. I believe he's a powerlifter. Can you believe that? But he was doing a little photo shoot for some product. I watched him go to the cable station. He would do a superset of tricep extensions, like pushdowns, and then curls. Why? He kept his biceps and triceps, his arms pumped, because he kept retaking these pictures. He would do his superset, he'd go over, he'd sit there and posture with the thing, his friend would take pictures, they'd look at it, I don't like those. He'd go back, get his pump again, and they just kept repeating this process. I'm not kidding, it lasted over a half an hour. But this is far more common than you might realize. This is what so many guys do before they take quick little videos, or posing videos, or photos of themselves. They get a gigantic pump. Maybe they have a giant meal beforehand or whatever they're gonna do, so they may look really big in that split moment, and of course they're going to be under the perfect down lighting. This is ultimately enhanced even more so, the leaner that you are because your muscles pop more, your skin is tighter. There's all these factors that go into it, but if you saw this person in a candid picture, even if they're halfway flexing, like kind of midway through doing a lift, they're not going to look remotely as close as they do in the staged pictures. So when you see one of these guys and their bulging muscles popping out, but then their lifts are not really even in the ballpark for what their size is, especially when it comes to the overall weight that they carry, they're not as big as you think, or how they portray themselves to be. And by the way, that crushes them deep down inside. That's why they're addicted to junk volume in the pump, because that's the only time their self-esteem is ever good. And since a lot of you are still probably not convinced, or at least you're still on the fence, like, you know, bro, like, you're making good points, but, you know, hypertrophy, let's go back to the golden era. Because even to this day, these are widely regarded as the most aesthetic and the most sought-after physiques for men. You see these type of comparisons on Instagram all the time, Arnold versus C-Bum. And even though C-Bum is the current reigning Mr. Classic, he's got all those followers, almost every single comment is going to be in favor of Arnold. And pretty much everybody would say that Frank Zane's physique is better than all of the top classic guys today. You know, which is funny because a lot of these natural zealots, they'll put them in their thumbnails to get attention and clicks, even though they say all the steroid users are inherently bad people and a bad influence. Except when they're getting you more clicks and eyeballs, I suppose. Not hypocritical at all. But even a physique like Steve Reeves, if we want to keep this in the so-called natty attainable range, his physique is still widely desired today. So many guys would be thrilled to get to this point. Now let's put on our thinking caps. Despite all of their differences in height and weight and era, where they're from, their rep ranges, whatever it might be, what did these guys all have in common? They used the basic barbell exercises. Yes, many of them did all three power lifts, sometimes routinely. That was a huge portion of their training. This is what really cracks me up, man, because the guys that are still revered the most, even 50 plus years later, you can look at videos, at photos, at their training logs, at their books, all this other stuff. These guys talk about the basics constantly. They didn't have access to all these new machines and methods that we have today. They still had better physiques. Now, would these guys place in terms of bodybuilding at this point? No, they wouldn't, because the standards have become that much more extreme. But pretty much everybody watching here, the vast, overwhelming majority of you, would love to look like these guys did. Or even if you're a natty zealot, you want to get the natural version of this, or whatever you think is natural. And even in the modern era, I did an old video reacting to Chris Bumstead in that interview. The guy asks him what are the top 10 exercises for building muscle, and he goes on to name the basic template of starting strength. He's like, squats, deadlifts, bench press, pull-ups. I mean, seriously, man, you can look through all of these guys no matter the era, current, back in the day, way back in the day, whatever the case is. The basics are always a cornerstone of these people's training, But we're supposed to believe now that it's like, oh, well, you can't do those exercises, they're not good, and the Smith machine version is always going to be better, and this machine version's always going to be better, and low reps are bad, even though Franco Columbu was a great powerlifter, Arnold was a great powerlifter, Ronnie Coleman was a great powerlifter. I mean, you guys are so out of touch. It's kind of ridiculous. And even if you still want to hang your hat on the Natty argument, like, oh, well, you're using these juice heads as an example, once again, you can never prove that the natural, so-called, are actually natural. That's just how it goes. But if you want to hang your hat there, you can find this on Instagram too, guys. The vast majority of the top natural physiques, these guys are still very strong. Even if they're not doing bench squat and deadlift, if they're doing Romanian deadlifts, if they're doing incline bench, if they're doing some other variation of the squat, they're not in any circumstance going to be weak on those exercises. These are rare outliers, no matter which side you're talking about. Oh, the small guy, allegedly, that's insanely strong. Outlier. Oh, the really jacked guy that's allegedly really weak, or the allegedly really jacked guy who is weak. Outlier. A lot of you guys don't understand the bell curve at all. You guys think you can use these 1 in 10,000 examples as ironclad proof that the exception to the rule is going to work for you and everybody else. And I hate to tell you, but it is not. So if you are looking for a program that you could consider power building, because I like to implement size and strength concurrently, this is nothing new, it works, it is time tested, a lot of great reviews. Check out the links down below at revivalfitness.org/programs. Novices and intermediates available a number of days to best fit your schedule. Get bigger and get stronger. Both are possible at the same time, and really, if your training is effective, you are going to get both at the same time. But this has been it for me, guys. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check those links out down below to get your routine, get in contact with me, and join the Discord via Patreon. We can talk about any questions you have regarding training and eating, as well as form checks, and save money on some other great products and services. And I will catch you guys next time.